evening. I'm really happy to be here tonight with Jordon Ozero and Jordon is going to be going over his thesis on the pilgrimage as a transformative experience for people who have a secular motivation for going there. So, Jordon, you have a presentation that you'd like to make. Do you want to start off with that?
That's a great place to start. And then I know you have some questions, and if I hurry along well, we can certainly entertain questions from anybody else as well. So let's get right to that so that we are not wasting our time.
Very good.
Great. Can we all see the presentation now?
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. So, as Tom said, my thesis is called El Camino de Santiago, a catalyst for transformative tourism in the secular space. So, we know historically, for probably close to 1,200 years now, there's been pilgrimage along the way of St. James, and we've certainly seen a new emerging form of tourism, which is more secular based. So just to get us started, I'll give you just a brief background on myself and how I ended up here. At the point of my first Camino, if I step back 10 years, I had spent those 10 years working in the cruise industry. I worked 8 to 10 months a year on board a ship. I worked 12 to 14 hours a day with no days off. And I'd come home for 2 months vacations. So after a decade of doing that, I was in a pretty strong place of burnout. I was constantly surrounded by noisy environments, thousands of people, and I really did need to get away from it all. As luck would have it, summer of 2012, like so many others before me and with me, I watched a movie called The Way. That was my introduction to the Camino pilgrimage, and by the end of the movie, I'd already started planning my next vacation. So, in January of 2013, I found myself starting in Saint Jean Pied de Port and spent the next 5 incredible weeks walking through rain, sleet, mud, ice, snow, with a few blue sky days sprinkled in amongst all that. Over those 5 weeks, I met a total of 12 pilgrims. So, we see the photos today from Sorry onwards. This year, I think I just read we've eclipsed 400,000 people reaching Santiago this year. So, absolutely remarkable, the growth. This, for me, was a chance to walk in solitude and silence. And it was really the first time in a decade that I'd had that. And it really gave me the space to think, to allow my subconscious to bubble up issues that I was trying to deal with, and ultimately to make plans for how I wanted my future to go. And it wouldn't be long after that first Camino that I was really able to start incorporating these ideas and these changes towards a much more satisfying life, which, as Tom said, recently, 2020, when the pandemic emerged, I stepped off my last cruise ship and started my master's degree with Royal Roads. So very exciting time for me. And this thesis was the culmination of that degree. So the thesis is a phenomenological study. So we're studying the phenomenon of personal transformation of secular pilgrims along the Camino. To gather data for the thesis, I spoke with Canadian pilgrims who had motives to walk the Camino that were secular in nature, and declared that they had experienced personal transformation as a result of walking the Camino. My goal was to identify the catalysts that facilitated their transformation, and with the ultimate hope that by knowing what the catalysts were, they could be shared with others who are also seeking change in their life, and for tourism organizations who want to create environments for people who want to transform during their vacations. I should say my master's degree is in tourism management. I've worked in tourism for over 30 years, so that is my bent for sure. And my long-term goal through this now is to help shift tourism in my own local area towards a far more sustainable, meaningful tourism that connects tourists with our culture, people, and place. So I'm one of the reformed. I went from being one of the 60,000 people walking through Venice on a daily basis to now wanting a more sustainable form of tourism. So that leads to a question that I think we often hear in the pilgrimage world, and that's tourism. And is it a dirty word? Because it really is the elephant in the room when it comes to a Camino talk. In the modern Camino, we often hear terms like tour grino, and usually they're in a negative connotation and referring to pilgrims who just want to fulfill the minimum distance to get a Compostela. So we all see the pictures of the day before Sarria and the day after Sarria, and the radical change between those 2 days. It's also not uncommon to hear people of very strong Catholic faith that anyone not walking a religious pilgrim is a tourist, not a pilgrim, in fact. So there's really a lot of strong emotions around all this. My research, I use the definition of tourism that is proposed by the United Nations World Tourism Organization, and they define it as anyone traveling to and staying in places outside of their usual environment for not more than 1 consecutive year for leisure, and not less than 24 hours, and not for reasons related to business. So it's a much more, much less emotional definition of tourism. And we can see how that model fits with being a tourist in your own country, being a tourist as you do pilgrimage. And in fact, pilgrimage is often considered one of the earliest forms of organized tourism. Along the Camino, religious tourism began shortly after the confirmation of the remains of St. James by King Alfonso III. And his state recognition really paved the way for organized tourism, as tradesmen who were often foreign, a lot of French tradesmen came in and settled along the Camino route. Think Via Franca del Bierzo, for example. As they settled and started building the infrastructure that the pilgrims relied on so heavily, that was really the beginnings of organized tourism. Today, what we see along the Camino for tourism, we certainly see religious tourism. We see cultural tourism, pleasure tourism, sport tourism, and then what we'll talk about today, secular transformative tourism, which really is probably one of the newer forms, as it's an emerging form that searches for transformation in oneself. So I don't think tourism is a dirty word. The findings from this research that I did, through 15 interviews with Canadian pilgrims, all secular in nature, there was a lot of analysis done. And I found 3 overarching categories. I found their motivations, their catalysts, and their transformations. And within the category of catalysts, 25 unique catalysts were identified and subsequently grouped into 4 themes. And those themes were communitas, liminal space, physical elements, and Spanish-specific elements. So there we go. I should run the screen ahead. The one that I focused on the most, of course, was the communitas. If I got down there we go. And if you're not familiar with this term, it can be described as a meeting of people who, regardless of their background, form relationships as social equals. My study also considered the places and the events that help create this environment for communitas. And when we look at the type of catalyst specifically in there, I think most people will be very familiar with this if they've walked a Camino. By far the most cited catalyst was the Camino family. And that really is, almost the epitome of communitas along the Camino, because we hear so often, and probably have partaken in Camino families and what value they bring and what joy they bring to a Camino, and the amazing way in which they form. In a spontaneous manner, total strangers seem to come together in such a wonderful way and spend all or at least part of the Camino together and end up sharing amazing things with each other. So it really was the most important catalyst that we saw in this whole study. The other thing that I found kind of interesting going through this as well was how women and men referenced and cited these catalysts as well. And when we look at some of them, it shows a little more as we get into the personal narratives of each of the people I interviewed. But going through the situations they were going through, it was very interesting to see what was more prominent for women versus men. The next big category was physical elements, and certainly here, even though the secular pilgrim is probably more concerned with the journey than the destination, there's a lot of similarities in a religious pilgrimage and a secular pilgrimage, in that there is a calling to the event. There is the struggle getting through the Camino, the hardship, the search for meaning. So a lot of participants in my study really acknowledged this and how important they felt walking through the countryside for anywhere up to 5-6 weeks, some as much as 8 weeks, was important to that final transformation that they had. The next one were Spanish-specific. Oh, I think I missed one here. Sorry. Get back up to liminality. Because this one is also very important. This is the idea that we need to step outside of our normal day-to-day environments and have that ability to get away from the busyness, get away from the responsibilities. And it's within this liminal space that we do see the communitas most prevalent, and we see the opportunity to think and reflect on our lives and our issues. And this was also a very important element for almost all of the people that I interviewed. And then the Spanish-specific elements, because the Camino really is, it's a lot more than a series of trails culminating in a cathedral in Santiago de Compostela. The attributes of this Camino include the physical routes, but they also speak to the communities and the people that you walk through every day, the network of albergues, the traditions of the Camino. These are all very important elements that were cited by the people in the study. And then what was probably the biggest surprise throughout this study was the importance and the story of the personal narratives for each of the people that I interviewed. I didn't really think about this coming into the study, but understanding better how they were motivated to be on the Camino, the catalysts that they experienced during the Camino, and then the transformations they experienced, create this lived experience, this personal narrative. And it became one of the stronger elements of the thesis itself. And I think that's because it speaks to a story that many can relate to, and it creates the opportunity to share these experiences with others who are looking for transformations themselves. So it was a very pleasant surprise, and one that I ended up using the most post-thesis as I work with groups in my local area now in the tourism sphere to share these stories and how they can be beneficial for people. There were several motivations, I think 8 motivations in total throughout across the 15 participants. And just as a couple, to see how this comes together was interesting. That the personal narrative of a person dealing with grief found, these particular catalysts were the most profound and noticeable within their journey. Camino family at the top, time to think and reflect, sharing experiences, liminal experiences, the support and acceptance of the people around them really helped them get to a point where they could say that they had a new ability, or at least a better ability, to focus on themselves, to become comfortable with just themselves again, to have clarity of purpose, and to be easier on themselves and less rigid overall. And of interest, of the three people that were dealing with grief that I spoke with, these were almost copy paste. So really an interesting idea that going through grief seems to be really focused on these elements. And again, the ability to share them with others who may be dealing with grief as an opportunity, almost a therapeutic opportunity, is a wonderful product of the thesis. Another one at maybe a different end of the spectrum is the personal narrative of someone that went for adventure, because in this particular case, we could see Camino family became so important. And this was not a surprise, because each of the people that went for adventure went on their own. They didn't go with other people. So having others come together, the physical effort of having to walk across the country, sharing information became an important part with their new Camino family. And these catalysts ended up with them transforming themselves by being more comfortable, seeing a lot of personal growth and learning to accept their situation, and really having a profound new sense of how strong they were. And all these people, they came to the Camino with no expectation, no desire for transformation. And that was kind of the neat thing, is even without the desire or the search for it, it still came to them. So I thought that was a really interesting personal narrative that came out of all this. There are more, and if I believe Tom has sent the thesis link around as well. So I've documented each personal narrative in the appendix, so that can be looked at in greater detail. So that was the shortest possible summary I could come up with for this thesis. And I could spend hours talking about the 100-odd pages that I wrote, but that was the idea, that there, even within the secular sphere, there was wonderful opportunities for transformation, whether it was looked for explicitly or implicitly. It was really a wonderful thing to see how many people found those catalysts and had those transformations. I think you're on mute, Tom.
I'm going to ask you a few questions, Jordan, and once I've done that, I'll open the floor up to other people. And I'm hoping I'm taking people along the path that your thesis went. So you were very clear that the purpose of your investigation was to study transformational pilgrimage as opposed to transcendent or religious pilgrimages. Are there clear differences?
Let me preface the answer, I think, by saying the terminology can be confusing, because I think people could use transformation as a synonym for transcendence. So in my study, I would frame it more the direction, the differences between non-religious and religious pilgrimage. So I think it's a little easier distinction that way. And from what I gathered, the motivations, when they're secular, the journey itself may be of greater importance than the destination. I think that's one very big difference. And this was noted by some seminal authors in the field of pilgrimage. And I'm going to do my best, George Greenia, shucks. You know, he's in the crowd with us. Um, if you've ever seen his TED Talks, that's one of my favorite points is the aw shucks. And I am honored that he's here because he was my external examiner for the thesis, and that was truly an honor. So we have seen that the journey itself is very important. And to put it into context, in religious pilgrimage, it's not uncommon to see people fly or drive to the place of significance. So the journey itself is, I don't want to say irrelevant, but it isn't of importance. It doesn't define the struggle of the journey. Whereas as the secular transformations, a lot of it really revolved around the time spent getting to the destination, having the time to build the relationships, to have the time to think, for the subconscious to work, to find that what we would call a walking rhythm or a walking meditation that really taps into a much deeper place where we can think and process. That said, I would say that the catalyst that I observed certainly could be observed in religious or non-religious pilgrimages. I just think that when you think of some of the motivations for the historic religious pilgrimages, such as an indulgence or praying for the health of yourself or someone else, it certainly became more about the destination and being at the remains of St. James. So I do see that there is a difference.
Thank you, Jordon. You write of the conditions that create transformation on the Camino de Santiago are slow mobility, comunitas, liminality, physical space, and Spanish space. Can you just sort of give us a little bit of a look at those factors?
Sure, and certainly those are my groupings of. We quickly went through in the presentation some of the specific, well, all of the specific catalysts themselves, and this as a researcher is how I group them together, and I think they speak to different aspects. You know, the relationship aspect, the physical aspect within ourselves that we have to get, you know, X number of kilometers across the country. Looking at being in a liminal space, stepping outside of our normal environment. It's very hard if you work a 9 to 5 and come home and have to make dinner, and then you've got to put the kids to bed. Where in there do you find time to let your subconscious bubble up, you know, solutions to issues? It's virtually impossible. So stepping out of our environment gives us the opportunity for all this to happen. And the attributes in Spain along the Camino are very unique. You know, there are other trails. You can talk about the Appalachian Trail, for example, for a long distance walk. There are communities that support each other. There are some places in the world that have low cost lodgings for tourists, but the Camino has all these and has refined them for over 1,000 years is very unique. So I think this set of catalysts, it would be very difficult to find in their entirety anywhere else in the world.
Thank you. I think referring to Campbell, you talk about pilgrimage being a quest journey to a religious or special place that possibly has an element of hardship in it. What definitions do you use for pilgrimage?
Oh, yeah, it's a very very much an expanding term. We've gone from the very strict sense of a religious pilgrimage to a sacred place for a sacred reason. We use the term so differently today. We can talk about a pilgrimage to Graceland. We can talk about a pilgrimage to West Edmonton Mall. You know, we just use the term so differently now. What I really like, there's an author, Justine de Gauntz, who wrote that pilgrimage is really a journey with that's redolent with meaning. And I think that really captures it because it can speak to the journey, it can speak to the destination. It speaks of people who are, even in the secular term, expecting some mystical change. So it really captures a lot of that modern terminology of pilgrimage, and really speaks again to stepping out of the mundane and into the sacred. And we use that word even in the secular sense to really note a unique environment that's different from our day to day.
I enjoyed that you referred to Thoreau's comment of long meditative walks having the value of to shake off the village. Can you amplify that a little bit?
Sure, I really enjoyed that one as well. And I think it really speaks to modern society again. You know, society is getting louder, faster, busier. Everything has increased in speed, and for that opportunity to get off the wheel and to slow down and to have that walking meditation is absolutely invaluable. I know each not each, almost every person that I interviewed had that comment. Some people that had been retired for a while, they'd figured out how to get off the wheel already. But the most really felt that that was one of the most exceptional experiences of the Camino, was to slow down and to not be surrounded by noise and busyness. And I think that's really what Thoreau was talking about when he was trying to shake off the village. So, you know, here we are quite a few decades after, and it's still a very, in fact, maybe a more relevant term than it was in his day.
Yeah, so still trying to leave our roles, our status, our definitions of ourselves in the community we live in behind as we go on the Camino. You stated that there are three stages of the transformation on the Camino, which will also relate to Campbell's hero's journey. Can you briefly explain each one?
In very broad terms, most would break it down into three sections. So he spoke about a hero receiving a call to action. So really the idea of separating ourselves from the mundane and stepping into a different environment. And this one, I think, speaks to a lot of secular pilgrims because it talks about a call to action. There was something about the Camino that I was drawn to. I don't know what it was, but I'm drawn to it. That is that call to action that he speaks about. And there's a negotiation or a denial in many people that we put it off. And yet the calling becomes stronger. And ultimately, we cross that threshold and we get into what would be the second phase, which is really the ordeal. And one of the things that I equated with Campbell's model was something you hear quite often in community circles about the three phases of a Camino. You know, the physical, the mental, the spiritual. Even though they're not directly related and it's very linear, I still think I see a lot of the ordeal within those three ideas of the modern pilgrims. But in Campbell's model, it was about the struggle. It was about the physical struggle, the mental struggle. It was about learning new rules that you had to live by. And when we get into that far enough, now things start becoming more comfortable. We've learned the rules and we're adapting and we're transforming. And that leads us to the final phase, which is really returning home, coming back as a resurrected individual. And that in itself is still a big struggle because we have to take our new selves and try and reincorporate it into our old life. And it's almost a square peg in a round hole now, or a round peg in a square hole, because we're not the same person we were when we left and how we struggle with that coming back. You hear terms a lot like the post Camino blues. People are really struggle leaving the Camino because they found something so magical, and the thought of coming back to their mundane life is really a struggle. However, once we get past that period of the blues and we reintegrate successfully, this is the point in which we can be the mentor for the next person who hears the call. So, that's when the circle keeps going around, and it's a wonderful model for pilgrimage. Campbell did a wonderful thing there.
Yeah, I really relate to that. As a chapter coordinator, I try and put as much time in debriefing pilgrims who come back as preparing pilgrims who haven't gone for the first time. I think it's really important that they have a chance to sort of get some perspective on what they've been through, and the fact that they're not alone in the experience, but that they've kind of feel like they've had some transformation that has left them a bit shaken in the role that they were.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, the purpose of your study was to identify what specific catalysts foster the transformation on the Camino de Santiago. You found 25. Were there catalysts that surprised you?
Not really. When I listened to the people speaking, it was I've done the Camino 3 times. I should say that up front. So I have a working familiarity with the Camino itself and pilgrimage. And as I listened to each of them, I was really I could put myself in those situations. So I didn't really find anything surprising in the catalysts themselves. What was interesting was the importance of each catalyst to people with different motivations. And that led us back to the personal narratives and how did they get from motivation through the catalyst to the transformation. So it wasn't the catalyst, but it was the use of the catalyst or the importance of the catalyst that really was interesting.
Any catalysts that you felt were not present for the pilgrims that you were expecting to see?
Here, I would say no. Again, because one of the hardest parts of doing all of this research was taking my 3 Caminos and putting them on a shelf to really listen to the person I was speaking with and understand their lived experience. And I used a technique called semi-structured interviews where I would have a guiding question and then I would let the interviewee run the interview after that because I didn't want to inject my experience, and they got to really talk about what was most important to them and what really defined their experience. So I really didn't come in with a set of expectations, but I certainly did relate to all of them that they did bring up.
Do you feel that there are areas of future study that your investigation has set up to look at?
I think there's certainly an opportunity to expand on this one. I think, I had a sample size of 15 pilgrims. I think the more you incorporate and the more motivations you find and the more transformations you hear about, the greater the opportunity to share that exists. So really, there's a lot of people going through a lot of things that we can never really know about fully. So the more that we can share and help people transform themselves, certainly is an opportunity. And it also sort of leads into my next research project. There's a term that I would be shocked if everyone hasn't heard of it. It is the Camino provides. And we hear this in almost like a sense of reverence or of mystical proportions. And I think that's something I really want to look at because I'd like to know if there is something beyond what we can grasp. Is there something truly mystical or religious based that is special about the Camino? On the flip side, I also recognize that more than ever so before, there's a tremendous amount of information that people can sift through prior to their first Camino. And when we take that information and we bring it on board with us before we've ever left our home, I can't help but also wonder if we're creating something of a self-fulfilling prophecy where all the learnings we've taken in have created the answer for us, at least at the subconscious level, before we've ever left, and going maybe is irrelevant at this point. So I think it would be an interesting thing to research, because I'm certainly willing to believe that there is something more to what the Camino provides. But on the other hand, the academic in me now wants to also believe that there's an explanation for it. So a couple interesting things to do as the future comes.
Super, thank you. I'm going to open the floor up to other questions, and maybe the best way to structure this would be if you can move your cursor down to the bottom of the screen and see where it says reactions. And if you click on the reactions, you'll see a place where it says raise hand, which I've just done. And if you raise your hand, you'll go to the top of the photo list I have, and then I can call on you, and that way we won't be all speaking at one time. So I'm lowering my hand now. So somebody else's turn to indicate a question or to ask, move the conversation along.
I'm not sure if Daphne wants to ask a question or just really enjoys what I'm saying.
Well, if you raise your hand, I'll call on you. Otherwise, Julia, you had a comment in the chat that you were interested in, and Julia has written a book that talks about the Camino experience from a fictional point of view. Julia, did you want to just ask Jordon a question or relate to what your findings were as you were writing a fictional piece of work?
Well, I'd like to thank Jordon, because it's lovely to hear him articulating many of the things that I struggled to put in my book. But I think when I saw his Communitas page, it just so related to how things I put in my book. So the story, it's a fiction, of course. I'm sorry, Jordon, you're an academic to talk to you about this fiction, but I think you might find it quite interesting. It's a Canadian couple, who set out on the Camino and have a personal issue they have to resolve. And they go on the Camino and it gets worse and things happen to them. It's fiction. But the husband, Bob, is secular. His wife is a churchgoer, but Bob undergoes a transformation, and this transformation is sort of helped along by spiritual elements along the trail. And Jordon's talk of the community and the people they meet and the little sort of pods they create, I put that in my book. I'm so pleased to hear that is of course, I knew it was a shared experience. So anyway, so I guess I'd like to thank Jordon for his research. Thank you.
Well, you can thank the participants. They're the ones that brought their stories forward. And I think a lot of great fiction, I think of Dan Brown, who incorporates an amazing amount of history and reality into his fiction. And one day I hope I'll have some time to read your book as well.
Okay, thank you.
Just to make it now a word from our sponsor, I'm holding up a copy of the book, which I am currently in the middle of and enjoying. So thank you for that contribution, Julia. Daphne, do you want to ask the next question or make a comment?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I know that I just want you to just go over once more. You met all the people on your Camino that you interviewed, or was there other ways that you determined who you were going to interview? And were they all from around the world, or were they from a specific place?
I met none of them on the Camino. I did my Caminos in 2013, 16, and 18, and I started my degree in 2020. And through the CCOP in my Victoria chapter, there was a call for participants put out, and also if you're familiar with Ivar's Camino forum online, I put a call to action out there as well. And so everyone that was part of the study came from those two sources, and each of them self-declared that they were secularly motivated and had had a transformative experience.
So once,
Just the self.
so once again, were they all Canadian, or did they come from, I know you said Ivor, so I'm just wondering, are they from other countries besides
Yeah,
Canada?
fair question. No, I purposely stayed within Canada. When you're writing a thesis, the biggest danger you have is your scope exploding. So, you know, I could have certainly looked at other English speakers around the world. I could have tried to work with other languages, because, of course, if I could have interviewed Spanish pilgrims, I would have probably had a very different set of catalysts and motivations. But to keep the scope manageable in my research, I limited it to 15 Canadian pilgrims. And when I was speaking on Ivar's website, I made it very clear that that was, you know, a requirement, that the participant, the volunteer, be Canadian and secularly motivated.
And just to divulge, I was one of the participants, but Jordon and I were 9 hours apart in that I was just locking up the gate at Ponferrada, I think, to lock the pilgrims in the albergue grounds for the night, and he was back in Victoria 9 hours earlier. So it was early afternoon for him, and the end of my shift day when I was doing that. But still enjoyed the conversation and the chance to share perspectives.
I think I was his pleasant distraction for the evening.
Anyone else have a question they want to throw to Jordon? Go ahead, Colleen.
I was a little surprised that the element of safety was so low on your scale. Now, I'm assuming for myself, when I walked the Camino, it was huge at the beginning before I arrived, but once I got there, it became lower on the scale as well. Is that kind of the idea that you found with your participants?
I had only one or two people actually speak to safety. Both of them were younger ladies. And both of them, it was, I think, more, as you referred to in the beginning, just the unknown. And then as they, became part of Camino families, and keep in mind, some people hadn't walked the Camino for a couple of years before I interviewed them. So, often when we are looking back, we pull out the highlights. So that would also speak to it being a fairly low concern, because it wasn't a really big pressing issue. And it can also be a matter that they just had a very safe Camino. I think we've all seen some of the videos that circulate about people that have had very negative experiences along the way, and even a death a few years ago along the way. So it certainly is an element. And, I had a fairly small sample size of 15, and they all had a very positive experience.
Julie, you've got your hand up. Would you like to ask a question or make a comment?
Yes, I had a question. I'm just curious here. Jordon, was your thesis advisor at is it Royal Roads? Was he a Camino-related person?
She was not. She was a cultural anthropologist, which worked really well in my thesis, speaking about transformation and how society is changing. This was all very new to her.
Okay. Jim, I'm going to call on you and then Carla. Jim, go ahead. Just unmute.
So you mentioned you did your first Camino 10 years ago or more. And I don't know when you did your others, but I can't remember when you did your others. But I guess when I did my walk last year, the numbers were overwhelming. And I'm wondering whether there is a difference in how people approached it, who might have done it 10 years ago and responded to you, and how they, what their thoughts were recently. Because, like you said, this year, 400,000, and it's not over yet. Last year was 470 odd thousand, when it was all said and done, or something approaching that. Yeah, so I'm just considering, because you talk about the family, and that was all there. I can relate to all that. But I found even in the Meseta, you were never out of sight of somebody, and it just wasn't what my expectations were.
Yeah, fair comment. I would say my last Camino was 2018, so not too far past. But I have this weird Canadian habit. I like being in the snow, so I choose to walk in January. That's my favorite month to walk. Not really because of the snow, but mostly because I'm guaranteed to have long days by myself. And I know that that's not what everyone is looking for. If you go in July, well, let's say June, July, maybe a little of August, you're going to see probably 60-70% Spanish pilgrims, and they're there to enjoy their summer vacation. So their motivation is very different. Their actions are very different. Most of the Canadians I spoke to walked in the spring or fall. Only one that I can recall walked in the summer. So I think there's a potential for a difference there. But what I did also notice is that regardless of what year they walked, the people that dealt with grief, there was 3 different people that were dealing with the loss of someone. Regardless of what time of the year they walked, they had the same importance on the same catalysts and very similar transformations. So that's what the research tells me. Intuitively, I would agree with you that there could be some differences, though.
Well, I'm just looking at it from the perspective of that. And in fact, I think today is the day I finished up the last year in Santiago. So it'll be 1 year today when I did it. But I'm looking for the next one, not if, when I do my next one in 2025. It's going to be something less walked. So,
yeah, well, that's the other way to go. And I see a great opportunity to walk part of the Camino Frances and then switch off to the Invierno, maybe the Primitivo instead. But there's some wonderful other routes that you don't have to fight for a place on the trail.
yeah, it didn't meet my expectation from that point of view of the isolation. There were times when you were out there and you had it, but the crowds are just overwhelming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fair.
Jim,
All
I'm
right.
also a shoulder season walker, and the only time I was ever seeing people everywhere was one year when I was working in May, and then I walked from where I was working in Grignon to towards Burgos, and that particular time I saw people everywhere. But I've done a number of less used routes, and often hardly seen anybody. So, or if you go in November or you go in February, March kind of thing, you're much more alone.
Well,
If you look at the statistics on the Pilgrim website, the Pilgrim Office website, if you can find a way to deal with the cooler weather, even this year, it's very low numbers in January and February. The albergues are still open, the bars are still open. It is not walking in shorts, but you have the opportunity. Like me, I would go sometimes 3 or 4 days without seeing a single person.
Right.
And that's a wonderful thing.
Well,
And
I'm
that
thinking
makes
the
you special to
Portuguese.
Spanish people.
I'm thinking the Portuguese starting in Lisbon, which is not well traveled anyway to begin at any time. but doing
Mhm.
it maybe early March through and finishing in mid-April. So that's kind of where I'm heading. But that's yet to be determined. But again, the numbers looking for less people. So that's my comment. I just didn't know if there was a significant difference in what people thought or came out with based on timing. Like 2018, the numbers hadn't gone crazy. 2021, they started to go nuts, and they're going to be even worse this year.
Well, that was a holy year. Carly, did you have a comment or a question?
Sort of. It's not well developed, but I was wondering if Jordan, you had a sense of how many days of walking, regardless of the distance, it takes to start to have a really powerful transformation.
Mm.
I
The
noticed-
number, yeah, the number that I heard from people was 2 weeks. That
At
they
least 2 weeks,
felt
and
that,
okay.
yeah, that they had to get past the struggle first. There was for most people, there's a real strong physical barrier to enjoyment, especially if you're doing the Francis coming over the Pyrenees. That first day is a bit of a shock, no matter how much you've trained. And then they would say by the time they've come into their second and third weeks, they're now at a place where their body is becoming more comfortable, and they're able to really start the process of transformation. That's where they felt it.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I think John Barley says it takes 2 weeks to kind of unhook, or what is the word he uses, unravel or something from your home
Well,
life, and you're not checking
then
your
I'm
emails and
in
stuff like
good
that.
company then.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Very, very good. I'm gonna read it. Thank you. Great.
I've got a hand up from DQ, and then Pat.
Hey, Tom, it's David. And
Oh, it's David.
Yeah, that's one of my nicknames. Here with Colleen, and just picking up on that last point, Jordan and Carla. Carla, nice to see you again. It's been so long. We were off at a Camino movie this evening in Toronto. Just to pick up where you two were just discussing about that 2 weeks, just anecdotally, Colleen and I would absolutely concur that seems to be a good time, because we were stationed at Bercianos, which is a 2-week journey to just past the halfway point as Hospitaleros in the Parochial and Bercianos. And of course, people have had not just 2 weeks to walk, but a bit of time on the Meseta to walk. And across the cultures of the people that we spoke to in the sharing circle that occurs there, routinely we were hearing people who, interestingly, some self-declaring as essentially secular pilgrims, saying things were now shifting and brewing, and they certainly didn't expect it. And so I can think of probably like 4 or 5, maybe 6 examples of that over the course of the short 2 weeks that we were there. So I think the science and the anecdotes absolutely bear that out.
Isn't that interesting? And I love the comment about the Meseta, because every time I hear someone say you should just take a bus and go past it, I cringe, because I think it's one of those areas that is just made for transformation. So I love that they've had that opportunity to get into that. And if you're doing what I believe you call a sharing circle, I can just imagine what happens after. Because they're ripe for really self-exploration.
Yeah, Colleen's heartily agreeing over here on the couch off screen.
Yeah, I went through a similar kind of experience, I suspect, in Gragnon. I had 2, I think Tom and I talked about this at the time, but the 2 hospitaleros there were both from Toronto, lovely people. And I'm not biased because I'm Canadian, but they really were lovely people. And they took us up into that little area above the pews in the back there. I'm sure there's a proper name for it. And it was a profound experience.
El Coro.
There we go. Thank you, Tom. It was a profound experience for someone non-religious, which couldn't have surprised me more. But the experience was amazing. You know, I prefer to keep my singing to a shower, but I joined in with the Hallelujah version that we sang, and my wife and I just were amazed as we left there that we couldn't stop hugging everybody. You know, we had such an amazing experience there, and it was worth the pain of 2 days later still of sleeping on the floor. You know, really great experience.
Just a quick question, Jordon. Did you encounter anybody in your sample that set out with secular intentions, but discovered that it reawakened a former faith-based way of living?
Actually, yes, I did, and he went on to become a deacon in the church. So
after the Camino,
yes.
Wow.
So really, really a profound experience. And when we spoke, it was a coin toss whether I felt I could keep him in the sample, because, you know, a couple of years later, that's where his place was. He was firmly in the religious camp, but he certainly started out with at least a secular motivation. I don't want to say that he was a non-religious person, but his reason for going was secular in nature. So at the end, I decided that it was still the right fit for the study.
Thank you.
We've got another hospitalera on the call here. Pat, do you want to, Pat's coming in from the Halifax area. So go ahead, Pat.
Thanks, Tom. I'm here in the Far East. I wanted to say, Jordon, I find this framework really helpful. One of the most frustrating things I have when I'm talking to people at the front end, and I'm trying to avoid sounding strident, but I'm trying to encourage them to keep their options open until they're on the ground, and balance that against their instinct to try and take control over the quality of our experience by booking a good Camino and the best food and all that stuff. So this framework and the science base of it, I think, is really helpful in keeping one of those dialogues objective. And I'm really looking forward to your work on the concept of the Camino provides. Two thoughts on that, because I think you'll find it quite challenging. One is the social scientist Brené Brown has a definition of spirituality, which I always find aligns really well with the Camino magic concept. So that was one thought. And the other thought was that when I look at the catalyst categories that are being scientifically identified here, I could relabel them in a way that reflects theology very well. So I think I think that you're asking a really good research question there. I don't know if anybody will reward you for the answer, but I think that Camino magic and the concept of spirituality and the unseen things that cause people to act in the interest of total strangers is a really great area of study. The framework around communitas and liminality, I think in particular, are really good. And I'm going to rerun this video so I can do a screenshot of those two particular slides. I did a quick read through pieces of the thesis. Thank you very much. It's a really good work.
You're welcome, and you can save yourself. Not that I'm suggesting you don't want to rewatch this, but those screenshots are straight out of the thesis. So every table is in there, and it expands a lot more in each of those regions. So you can save yourself that part of the work. And thank you for the comments, of course. One thing I would say is if anyone gets into research to have someone else thank them, they're in the wrong line of work. You know, you do this because it's a passion, and this was a wonderful way to tie in my passion for the Camino with some academic work. So, but thank you for the comments.
Thanks, Pat. Jim, your hand is up. Is it up because you haven't taken it down, or you have another question?
I haven't taken it down.
Okay.
Lower,
I'm gonna call
lower
on
hand.
Julia then. I'm gonna call on Julia then. Sorry, I'm reading that wrong. Jules, pardon me. Jules, would you make your comment or question, please?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes,
For
we
sure.
can.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, it's very interesting work, Jordan. I'm curious how you see that your findings being applied to the tourism industry with respect to Caminos or any kind of pilgrimage or something related, some kind of adventure that's related.
Sure. I see it as a very simple translation, actually, by taking the parts and applying them individually. So we understand that individuals have motivations to do things, and we see in the tourism world now, worldwide, that there is a lot of interest in self-development. There's a lot of interest in cultural, meaningful tourism. The world is at a tipping point. Places like Venice, I referred to before. Before the pandemic, they were receiving around 65,000 transient tourists per day. And over a period of a couple of decades, this meant that the population of Venice went from 150,000 down to 50,000 because of the gentrification of the city. So if we look at the wonderful cultural environment of Venice, and we reframe why people come there, this can be a way to limit mass tourism. And it's like the person that's hardest on smokers is always an ex-smoker, right? So as someone that spent 20 years working on cruise ships, I'm as guilty as any person, and I'm trying to really tip the scales the other way now. I live in the mid region of Vancouver Island. I work at a very large resort, and we have a strong desire to shift tourism in our area to one that's based on a sustainable model. So we encourage people to come for different reasons now. We want people to connect with our culture. We have a lot of indigenous influence on the West Coast. We want people to identify with that and learn about that. I think it sort of speaks to the truth and reconciliation movement that's happening across the country now. We want people to understand our unique West Coast culture. So when we look at motivations, and those are the transformations we want out, it's incumbent upon us then to take the idea of adding catalysts or providing catalysts, or at least telling people what catalysts we have, because we can then help create that narrative that people come here for a different form of tourism with a far different outcome. If you go to, I'll use myself again, if you go to a cruise ship with all you can eat food and drink for a week, there is a transformation. You're you're going as one person, you're coming back as two. So we want to get away from that kind of tourism by using these kind of catalysts.
Okay, so it would be targeted to still individuals or groups, because I don't see how it could work with groups.
Sure. Think of health retreats, think of mindfulness retreats, think of yoga retreats. There are many different groups. There are work retreats, I can't think of the term right now, where companies bring their people to work together, team building, I guess you would call it. There's a lot of group opportunities. At my particular resort, we do a tremendous number of conferences a year. And even if we only add in elements of team building, of group building, mindfulness, if we build those in, we're not dominating the whole vacation, but we're certainly shifting the focus of tourism.
Yeah,
and that's where it starts.
Yeah, I see. Okay, thank you.
to give it to you from my perspective, in the hospitalero trade, we've had people come into the albergue and they're bringing their suitcases, and we're saying that's not what you did bring on the Camino, and we're educating them how to become a pilgrim. And in a couple of cases, we had people come back properly outfitted, and we said yes, and now you're a pilgrim, and now you know, and we connected people together. If people ask me my motivation for getting out on the in the albergue, I will often say that it is to try and convert the hiker, the adventurer, the bicyclist, the marathoner to become a pilgrim and to become aware of the people at their sides, to become aware of the environment, to become aware of the opportunity for Spanish culture and the dramatic opportunity to really have an experience that looks beyond yourself. And I think that's a great opportunity. Julia, you had your hand up a minute ago. Do you want to, did you want to say something?
No, actually, Jordan's answers to Jules' question answered my question, which was for Jordan, what next? But I think I've got that now.
Very good.
Thank you.
Good. Is there anyone else who has a question they'd like to get said? Jules, you still have your question, your hand up. Did you want to say some more?
No.
No? Okay. And if there's
Trying to
anybody else
figure out
who
how
has
to
a
get
well, there's a place at the bottom of your screen that will say
Yeah, I
lower
know.
hand.
It's okay. It's okay. It's on
Oh,
my
we got some more
phone.
people. Daphne,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I'm just curious if you had anyone have any surrealistic experiences that surprised them. And I don't know if the previous question about spiritual or whatever, that, you know, the guy who became a deacon. But I'm just wondering if there was anything else, you know, out of the ordinary.
I wouldn't say anything sensational. I think the people that I spoke with were just normal people that had a significant shift in themselves. And I think that in itself is sensational, but you know, nothing that you would you know, make the main character of an exciting new movie. Just ordinary people able to deal with ordinary issues in an extraordinary environment.
I think the transformation that's possible could be people exploring their creative side, writing poetry, writing songs, doing art, connecting with people. And I think the other area is service. I think realizing that to find happiness in life, that maybe getting out of your own self and getting into the service to other people is a way that you can create tremendous joy. Be surprised by joy in the opportunity of giving of yourself. Anyone have a final question or comment they want to make? Going once? Jordon, thank you so much for this time with you today. I think there's great value in this.
Very good. Well, thank you all.